enough, this happened at chemist as well. I was going to grab a plan B at the time. And this lady, it started off as such a normal interaction. She was like, I love your dress. I was like, thank you so much. It was just like my emotional back. And she's like, is it real? I was like, yeah. And she's like, did you steal it?
He was discovered by things like Kiwi Farms and online researchers of lolcows to also be drawing hentai and writing literotica.
OnlyFans.
Yeah, she's got the OnlyFans, but she failed on OnlyFans, so she got into hentai drawing and literotica of drawing rape fantasies about men, so men getting raped. Hello and welcome to the Contemplation deck. I am your host, the Cern Golem, and I have my regular co-hosts with me called Fish and Fish.
Hello.
I also have a very special guest, a lot of you might know, who has a lot more subscribers than me, called Sabina. You probably know her. Say hello, Sabina.
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, well, there we go. Yeah, we're all in person right now, so if you hear any echoing, it's not what some people like to do with the echo brackets for Jewish people. No, just because I'm Jewish. No. It's because we're all inside a living room and we could have some microphones reverberating off the walls.
Well, no, we're at Stone Golem Studio, so...
Well, yeah, we call it the studio. It's just like my living room, and you know, we're all beamed up on the TV.
That's also not very Jewish. I mean, too modest, mate.
Yeah, well, there we go. It's the goy half of me.
Jews are more of like a humble bragger.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
So-
oh god.
As we are today, I brought everyone together to rag on millennials a bit, because there was a video which I used as a stimulus by a YouTuber called Mr. Asian Pie, and he did a documentary on. He did a documentary video that's about 10 minutes long on the crash out of the infamous webcomic artist Pizza Cake Comics. And Pizza Cake Comics, not to be confused with the conspiracy theory Pizza Cake, is is one of these typical sort of 2010s era of like bedroom popular woke feminist sort of webcomics, which lacks a lot of punchlines, makes a lot of political commentary, which doesn't make a lot of sense, and is a somewhat decent artist, but usually the typical sins of drawing people they don't like that look like making them ugly, that kind of thing. And she was discovered by things like Kiwi Farms and online researchers of lolcows to also be drawing hentai and writing literotica.
OnlyFans.
Yeah, she's got the OnlyFans, but she will write. But she failed on OnlyFans, so she got into hentai drawing and literotica of drawing rape fantasies about men, so men getting raped, and with the talk about obviously the awful things about like male, like the consent issues and colleges and all type of stuff. And all the awful things that women have to go through. But then she's writing all this rape fantasies about men. So it's a double standard here that was quite glaring, and I think a lot of people turned on her. And she's lacks a lot of the self-awareness for typical of a 40-year-old millennial who's very much online. But I'm a Gen Z. We've got a bit of a generational sort of like good swath of people here. We're mostly born Gen Z to deep Gen Z. In Sabina's case, I'm a Zillennial, which is like 1998. Fish and Jish he's 30. He's kind of like on an end of millennial age. So So
Right on the border.
on the border, yeah. And Sabina is 2004, so very much more in like the deeper Zoomer category. And today we can just kind of have a bit of a rag on millennial culture and its lack of self-awareness and stuff like that. I mean, look, Gen Z itself has its own issues, so we can talk about that another time or on the podcast too. But we're having a bit of a rag on millennials in this one. So just to start off, anyone who watched the stimulus video, just mention it, and either if you did or didn't, just let's have a bit of a rag. This is the Contemplation deck, so we're all here just to have a bit of a think and a fun time. So, Jish, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with Pizza Cake Comics. I agree with what you said about Pizza Cake Comics. Just I wouldn't say necessarily, because I'm somewhat leftist, that it's always entirely objectionable, but I would probably say that it's kind of simplistic sort of comments and humor. So sometimes it might be funny, but I think they act like it's more profound than it actually is. Like I was joking about before with Mr. Stern Golem, how a lot of these sort of comics are not just reserved to Pizza Cake Comics, but also with Pizza Cake Comics, when they say a lot of these women creators have all these weird things about not shaving, which obviously is fine, but they make, for some reason, they make all these comics going like, oh, I didn't shave this summer or something, or rather winter because it's cold, so I look like a Yeti now, and they're like, ugh. And then they just make some weird punchline like that. It's like, okay, I mean, that might be true, but it's a little bit weird. And like you said as well, they usually just also draw like a Wojak kind of thing. They draw anyone they dislike as like some sort of ugly sort of character, and then go like, oh, sucked in kind of thing. Like they might have a legitimate argument, but again, it's kind of like a simplistic sort of comeback to almost a straw man. Yeah, so that's what I have to say at the moment. What does Sabina think?
I'll start with the caricature thing, because what I noticed, well, I'm not a fascist, I was going to say that, but that's like taking the piss. I'm not really. I would consider myself part of the new right, and I think that for me, aesthetics go with ideology. So when I see the caricatures, I personally believe this is not, don't think that they think this is just my thoughts. I feel like ugly people have ugly ideas. So I think what they're trying to represent is just like, it's not really, I guess, like a denigration of the argument itself, but I feel like more of like the ideology or what that person might represent. So I feel like by making them ugly, it's just a way to kind of like kick them off to the curb. And in terms of like the rape fantasy stuff, I would say, like, obviously men are more open about their sexual proclivities, but I know from like, my personal experience and just communicating with other women in general, women are way more perversely degenerate than men are. And even with the idea of rape, I think I'm in two minds about it. Obviously, rape is objectively bad. No one should be, taken out of their like consent or violated in that way. But I think it's kind of hard because it's more of a civilizational concept than a legal term when we discuss rape. But I think for women, there is a certain attraction, or when you meet a certain type of guy, consent is like irrelevant essentially. So I feel like it seems incoherent for her to be like super feminist and then produce this like erotica. But I think if you look at women's behavior and not the things that they say, that it checks out pretty consistently. Because like you see all these books, they've got like whether it's like these monsters, large and uncharged, egregious monsters, please. But I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
No, thanks for that input, Sabina. I pretty much agree with you there. I mean, just to kind of like add to what Fish and Jish said, I'm not typically that right wing. I'm like probably on the centre right, that kind of area, but I just know and familiar with like a lot of like fringe right, like kind of humour in that, like most people on the internet are. But what I mean by objectionable in the sense that she does like these comics about Donald Trump and stuff like that, which actually do have a good point, but they just got an awful punchline, and they're really badly delivered. And the main thing I would have as Mr. H and Pie's video sort of like emphasized was that the punchline to some of her stuff could have been like done so much better. rather than just having this like weird, dry, like deadpan kind of like quirky twist, or just the humor in it was that Donald Trump looks ugly, but it had no. The comic itself was in question was one of Donald Trump where. So the whole joke was when back in the birther era, when people were trying to get Obama's birth certificate to try and prove that he wasn't American, which was obviously a conspiracy theory and was false. He was trying to. He was part of that birther movement, but then back in the modern day now, he's now like saying, "Oh, please don't look at me on the Epstein files. Please don't look at me in the Epstein files." And obviously, like the joke being that, he wants some documents to be released, but not others, which is like a good like joke to make. But the whole comic itself is just. But if I can like reference it in the show notes, but this it could have the humor could have been done much more subtly. Or it could have just been done like where like the person needs to look at it and like the punchline is there in the last panel. A lot of the problem with millennial webcomics is they over-explain everything, and then when you over-explain the joke, it's no longer funny.
Yeah.
And so like the point could be made, and it's a legitimate point, but it's just one of these things where like for some reason like especially like some people here love Rick and Morty. I kind of stopped watching it after a while. Just because, well, even though the Pickle Rick stuff got really cringe, I also just thought that they tended to over-explain a lot of their jokes, in my opinion, and I think that the quirk humor just kind of took over the show a bit, in my view, and it was just I don't know, you can feel free to disagree with me, anyone who liked Rick and Morty, but I just got a bit bored of it, to be honest with you.
As in it was more sort of almost edgy human before, but it came a bit more, dare I say, millennial.
Yeah.
Go on. Yes, sir.
And so the issue is just completely that, like, I don't know, I just feel like Gen Z humor tends to, when they write jokes, like good Gen Z or even millennial humor that's like, got some experience with online culture, when they see the technical thing of like a right-wing meme versus a left-wing meme, I mean, it sucks to even call it that, but like, when they see the right-wing memes that are like, just racist Instagram reels or like stupid, like, jokes about this, it's always like the humor takes the humor takes a little while to process, and then suddenly like it makes some reference to some like crazy event or like some crazy stupid idea. Most of it's really like I don't know, like even the funniest one I saw was like it's just like it was like right wing meme versus left wing meme. The right wing meme was the worst example of one was like a smiley face with a text overlay going like when you N-word. And then that's just it. and then the left wing meme. The left wing meme was the same smiley face, but it was just like covered in text. It made no sense.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's not funny if you're just looking at something that's just covered in text. I mean, what level of verbosity do you need to be at for that to find that funny?
I think it's funny that it's extreme on both sides. There are complicated jokes, but obviously, if you have to take, which I've actually had before in my own experience, when some say SJW has tried to catch me out with a joke. Or an example would be, because I think this is relevant here, because these millennial comics tend to be very sterilized, very PC. I once remember laughing about, and this is not my term, that in Singapore, a lot of Asians sometimes have the term banana, which means like yellow on the outside, white on the inside.
That exists in the Black community as well. It's called an Oreo.
An Oreo, yeah, there we go.
I've been called an Oreo many times.
Exactly, but that's what I mean. It's a term they use, and I remember this really annoying, insufferable woman around my age, that sort of type that would be like an author in that sense. Apparently, she was giving me a straight face, and she thought she was going to own me with that sort of logic, try to get me to explain the joke, with the logic being that if I have to explain the joke, it kind of it's actually going to ruin it, because if it's either a joke is funny or it's not. If you have to explain it, it's rarely at least as funny. But I did it in such a way that I explained it to a sort of deadpan while explaining the logic of it and going why it should be funny, that it didn't really catch me out, sort of thing. So that's the sort of thing I'm saying. Like, you can have an explanation for a joke, but it should still be, small enough that people can understand, while just going, when saying the N-word, okay. that's funny in a kind of like naughty boy kind of way, but that's it.
It's just really stupid. Like,
Yes.
it's the worst example. They were trying to put the worst examples of
course.
right wing and left wing meme in this thing I saw a while back. And the thing is, of like, even our friend Sasquatch, who was on a few episodes ago, he's got a disability. He's got cerebral palsy, and he knows that he like walks a bit funny, and he knows that he's an eccentric guy because of his high pitched voice, and he likes the pokies, and he likes to drink a lot of typical Australian drinks like Bundy rum and stuff, and he likes to act like a bogan when he's very rich. So it's all like he's got a very eccentric personality like that. But he'll also like occasionally just like do these random impressions of different cultures and ethnic groups, which are very like South Park, Family Guy sort of like coded, if you want to call it like that. Like it's genuinely, some of it when he's in the right context and he's not pissing on people off, it's actually quite funny. It's only literally because you see a disabled guy like pretending to be Idi Amin or like Narendra Modi or some shit like that, and it's just like a rich disabled guy pretending to be like an African dictator is kind of funny. And I don't know, it's just like he's also his impressions themselves are so ridiculous that they're actually like over the top. And so there's that level of like, it's like so stupid it's funny. That's what a lot of right-wing humor, revolves around, like good right-wing humor. It's so stupid it's funny. A lot of attempted conservative humor, like Stephen Crowder trying to do stand-up and all that other shit. 'Cause he used to be a stand-up comedian before he actually got into being a political commentator. I've watched his stand-up comedy routines, and they're really not that funny. They're very forced. Like, I mean, he falls for millennial sins himself, being an upper millennial in his 40s, but he's not a particularly. I don't find him particularly funny when I watch him doing the stand-up.
I'm funny. Changed my mind.
Yeah, I'm funny. Changed my mind. Like it's just his humor is just very like it's not even dry. Like dry humor can be good. It's just bland. It's just like did you see these liberals? Lol, they're so offended. It's like, that's not humor.
It's he's saying the mirror way around. I want to ask Sabina something actually about. So before I was when Sabina was mentioning which was in the video as well, the sort of rape fantasies. I've seen some of those. Technically by definition controversial studies on them by NCBI. So it's like I think that's overall scientific database about a lot of women at least admitted to liking the rape fantasy. Now, to be fair, that doesn't obviously mean they want any random person to rape them. It's all simulated, which, as I'll get into later, is a bit like the new 36 million stat on CNN reported.
Oh, that thing.
Yes.
I think what's happening is, I think there's two school of thoughts, but they conflict with each other, and not even to like drag feminists out, but the way that we more or less sex and the language around sex. I'm pretty open, so I don't mind doing this. I've admitted it on my Substack before. I have actually been sexually assaulted, just like random Uber attack situation. And I found that the people that were moralizing rape and saying like I'm a victim, I should be ashamed, I should carry like this burden with me, it was actually making me feel worse about that ordeal. When if you look at the reality of it wasn't about me. It's going to sound weird to say or controversial, but I wasn't special. There's nothing special about being sexually violated. If it wasn't me, if any other women had gotten into that Uber, it would have been their story or their situation to tell,
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other part of the school of thought is that women are naturally agreeable, or at least more agreeable than men are on average. Obviously, there will be like anomalies and people that fall into outliers. And with the simulated rape fantasy, I think that is like a shorthand for marriage almost. Because when we think about marriage or at least long-term domestic relationships where the people are living together, you're kind of ascending into a oneness, like you're becoming one unit. So I think the rape fantasy is linked to wanting complete and total surrender. Because again, like this is something I've simulated in my old relationships. There's been times where like I was like, okay, I'm going to sleep, but I trust this person. So if they have sex with me when I'm asleep, it doesn't feel like a violation, Or I would purposely get super drunk so I could black out, and then I could simulate the rape fantasy in that way. I've also spoken to my friends about it. They've had the same situation. If you see it on the inverse, like from the male side of things, men that tend to be like pretty sexually competent or at least have had a lot of sexual partners, I've also had them reference to me like, oh yeah, this girl brought up that she wanted me to do this to her while she's saying no. I don't think it's like they're not desiring actual rape, obviously. I think they're just desiring conditions in which you can trust someone completely, even to, I guess, simulate that violation.
Well, it's like you see these kind of crazy situations where there's all these girls who are into choking, with BDSM stuff, and it's like the choking stuff can actually kill people, right? And it can like disable them for life, and like when you cut oxygen off the brain from the brain, it can cause actual it can cause risks of stroke and all this other stuff. But it is interesting, and this NCBI thing you kind of referenced. My father was a psychiatrist, so he dealt with manically depressed and like schizophrenic homeless people, and like he's one of the best psychiatrists in the country in terms of like HIV/AIDS impact on like the homeless and on just the general population. But he was, he would administer electroshock therapy. So what I mean electroshock, I mean like what they call electroconvulsive therapy, which has been now to date replaced by phased in with a lower form called magnetic stimulants therapy, and that's more for like more acute, less severe conditions like lighter depression, higher anxiety, generalized anxiety, obsessive compulsive tendencies, that kind of thing. There's some evidence that having electromagnetic stimulation, there's not a crazy amount of evidence why it works. They just know it works. But obviously, if you want to get RCMS, which is the newer version of the old electroconvulsive stuff, it is very expensive and very specialized, and you probably need to have like a referral. And I don't think it's covered by things like the NDIS or which is like the National Disability Insurance Scheme. I don't know. I know there's some very fancy clinics out there that do it. I once visited one. It was actually quite interesting. I didn't actually get the treatment, but I was interested in the topic at the time. Like I look at this stuff and I'm thinking like, well, yeah, there is a lot of these studies on women as patients, women as potential, there's the ones that are done in universities on their students. Obviously, there's a lot of bias in like psychological studies done in universities because it's all done on like, what they call weird people. So Western educated, usually, what's the other one? It's like all upper class sort of like enfranchised students. You might get the odd person on a scholarship, but the other part that you'll see is predominantly it's all Western educated or upper middle class people in the studies. The experiences of kind of like working class and disenfranchised people, especially in terms of like these awful sorts of experience like there's like sexual assault, which we know from like other things like sociology and everything else, is very, very prevalent, because a lot of awful things fall through the cracks of society. A lot of the experiences around in the literature around sexual assault is based around upper class social situations. So whenever we all obsess about like the rapey college kids who get girls drunk and then two college kids sleeping together and the one pressures the girl who's a little bit shy into having sex with them at the dorm. That shit is fucked up, but it's nowhere near like the kind of stuff you're currently seeing in like it's not the Congo where like warlords use rape as a weapon of war. It's not like like we're seeing like refugees and like failed asylum seekers in Sweden having to take courses on you can't grab women at music festivals if they're not wearing a hijab, that kind of stuff. Like there's a complete spectrum to the type of violence against women that society sees. Now, in general, I would agree with a lot of feminists that say that like violence against women gets trivialized in many ways and it gets swept under the carpet. That's why it's such a pervasive issue that we just can't seem to get a hold of completely. I have a lot of feminist family friends that I agree with on this topic, especially around like domestic violence. There's so many ways that society trivializes it, and the cops can't properly prosecute it based on like problems in the law. But at the same time, a lot of this literature around sexual assault, especially with like these Substack feminists or Substack writers, is it's not based on working class experience or kind of like that lower rung of society, which my father was dealing with as patients. It's often the upper class, and I don't want to try and grade the spectrum of violence against women because it's not exactly fair to the trauma they have to go through. But if we have to look at things on an objective level, there is a difference between I don't know, being convinced to do something you don't want to do and being kind of coerced into it by peer pressure, which is, not consensual, and being grabbed, physically violently grabbed. And it's like, if it's physically violent grabbing, which is a very common thing in like working class communities and like people who are disenfranchised, I don't understand why the emphasis isn't on the heaps more violent stuff, to try and curb that stuff rather than this, the stuff that's all about the grey lines. I understand the grey line stuff is really, really bad and it's very, very, very pervasive, but there's more emphasis on this, and when the damage, and the type of trauma it's so much less physical. I don't know, and people, I mean, I can't grade this stuff, but like people having something peer pressured into something, it's psychological long term damage, but it's also it's also like a case of if they weren't physically violently grabbed and like restrained and that sort of thing, like that's so much worse in my view.
I don't mean to necessarily push back on that because I do agree, but what I would say is that's a story for another day. I think that like as someone obviously that's gone through that experience, what I get frustrated is because women are agreeable, a lot of the times they will elect to, and I'm using the word elect purposely, even though it's unconventional, they'll elect to have sexual contacts because they feel it's easier than rejection or standing on a boundary. And I don't think that emphasis should be on, oh, this person is so bad, because at the end of the day, if I ask you to do something and you choose to do it yourself, and then later you're experiencing psychological damage, I don't think the psychological damage is from the sexual contact. I think it's from the fact that that specific woman can't reconcile her stated values or her stated preferences with her revealed preferences. Not to use the economic term, but it's relevant in this discussion, because my guy, he was prosecuted, by the way, just to let the viewers know. He was sentenced to 12 years, and then after he finishes 12 years, he'll be deported from Australia. Like his it's over for him, basically. But even in that instance, that was a very violent thing that happened. Like he had drove off to like some random street, constrained me in the car. I wasn't able to move. I did fight back. I actually, with the medical imaging, he had to go to the hospital as well because I had bit him very severely, and that didn't stop him. But I think the reason that people don't want to fixate on situations like what happened to me is because then you'll have to talk about the economic and the racial aspects of what is happening. The guy that assaulted me, he was Somalian. I don't think that's surprising. I feel like most of the time when you see like these very graphic, horrible assaults that can sometimes even like end up in like death, it's usually from like you said, the Congo, which I was laughing at before. I had to try to be quiet about it. But it's coming from cultures that have a certain entitlement towards women. So I don't understand how the self-stack feminists can get on there and like, proclaim the Western world is so bad. These Western men are so horrible. There's such raging misogynist and there's a rape culture. I don't agree with that because I'm someone that, obviously, I've never been in a third world country. I was born in France and then I had moved over here. But when I hear my mother talking about things that happened during the Civil War in South Sudan, or I hear my aunties, or even certain like Jewish family members that are in much stricter like Hasidic communities, they will speak about the sexual violence that exists there, and that sexual violence specifically comes from a mindset about entitlement towards women. And I just don't agree that Western men or the average Caucasian man living in a Western country has that entitlement to women. If anything, I feel like they have an aversion to women, and it's not a malicious one. I feel like they're scared of women because when you have like the Me Too stuff and like these girls coming out saying I've been assaulted, or if a guy approaches you and he tries to like compliment you that's sexual assault, that's catcalling, I think that they're much more passive. They're not very domineering. So even when you see an influx of sexual assaults or rapes happening, it correlates directly with the immigration that's occurring. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, I think I agree there. Like, especially with Pizza Cake Comics, probably pretends, and a lot of people, in my experience on campus, pretended a lot of this stuff conveniently was mainly just white men. But on these things online, when I've discussed with feminists before, when they've always said, "Oh, it's enough men, so therefore we can berate all men." When I've told them before, how does that look if you change the frame of reference to, say, which is also probably true, a lot of crime stats in a lot of these countries do happen to have at least disproportionately more say, black people committing these crimes. How would it feel then to go, oh, I'm sorry, I can't date you because you're a black person, just say, because it's enough black people, so I'm afraid of all black people. And I've tried mirroring that, going, that's no less or more bigoted than the other way around. But instead of either admitting that or even just smoke screening, they just suddenly miss the point and go, how dare you, that's so racist. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's the point. Because I mean, it's the same sort of bigoted logic, but obviously they think, oh, it's fair to tar all men, but when they tar men, they usually would prefer to tar white men, because if it had a stat about um women who sorry, men who aren't white, that they would suddenly, be very hesitant to call anything out like that. And that actually reminds me, so my mum used to work for government, for example, in alcohol and health in that sort of area. And I remember going up to her and telling her about before Redfern got gentrified, for example, they had all these signs up for please don't take alcohol and drugs into our communities, all that sort of stuff, because of all the women that usually get battered by their men, God forbid, children as well, when they came home with a lot of drugs and alcohol. So I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously an unfortunate reality, but I'm surprised the government put down the signs. Now, apparently though, according to my mum, however, the people that wanted those signs up were Aboriginal women. Now, I'm saying that as well because if you took that to campus and said drug and alcohol is a disproportionate issue in a lot of these Indigenous and sometimes people of color sort of communities.
South Sudanese, it's okay, we can say it.
Okay, South Sudanese as well. Yeah, South Sudanese as well. then they would be horrified. But what about then if women from this community said themselves, no, this is a problem. We need to fix this now. Then all of a sudden these typical white first world feminists like Pizza Cake Comics are just suddenly going to have their brains explode because they're not used to framing it that way.
They actually doubled down. I've had these discussions before, specifically with Native American women in Canada. So, like Inuit, I suppose. I'm ignorant, forgive me. But they have like this double-tiered legal system where it's like what happens is they want to focus on this demographic that's being abused, right? So in this case, the Native women. But they also want to protect the Native men. And the way that these feminists, I guess, deal with their cognitive dissonance is they say, since they were colonized, it was the white man that told them to abuse that woman. Before white men,
oh yeah,
they were peaceful, lovely people, living kumbaya, love and light, eat, pray, love, fantasy. But then white people introduced all this violence to them, and they generally do believe that. It's the same thing with Aboriginal women here. We talk about the incarceration rate a lot in Australia, and specifically how Aboriginal people are overrepresented in the legal system. I don't think it's an overrepresentation. I've had this discussion with Aboriginal women as well. They're exactly where they need to be because they're abusing the women. This is a factual reality. They're also abusing the children. I think everyone has this, but specifically when children experience sexual violence, it really turns my insides, And so it's like, we can have these discussions like, oh yes, they're overrepresented, but if they're actually doing these crimes, mind you, they get reduced sentences because, say for example, if a white man rapes me, it's likely not going to happen just because of a proximity thing, but you probably get like, actually honestly it depends on how much evidence you have, but let's say in the best case scenario, I'm able to prosecute him, he'll get between like 15 and 30 years. If that was an Aboriginal man that had done that to me, because I wouldn't say it's completely a different legal system, but there's certain concessions made for them in the legal system, and they talk about like the cultural aspects of why their behavior might, what's the word I want to use, maybe for, God, I can't even think about it, edit this part out, my rambling. It expresses itself as violence, basically. And they're not going to get as much of a penalty for white men.
It's like almost like you don't get this all the time, but maybe certain legal defense systems might try this, and it'll be like uh, you definitely see cases where a an extra factor of almost like pleading insanity or like like pleading like disability, because you get obviously like cases where like people with disabilities might go to a psych ward or a rehab unit for grave crimes that a normal person wouldn't. So they might try and grave on those lines. Now, like, interpret that how you will, because that I wouldn't try and equate. I think it would be obviously very racist to equate like an ethnic minority group with a disability, because like that's like why would you do that? But then the thing is like sadly like a lot of these kinds of legal defenses operate along those lines. So you'll see like concessions made for different grave crimes, which they want to try and give someone a second chance, right? Which is obviously a great intention, but you'll see like along the lines of rehab and like social mobility and stuff, people being kind of let off the hook or something like that, or like giving reduced sentences so they could get a second chance, even though like the crime might be really grave. Especially, yeah, like the whole like case of like when they talk about kids incarceration and Aboriginal kids incarceration, Aboriginal kids in custody, dying in custody, that kind of thing. Like yeah, like those Northern Territory prisons are rough, and the prison guards are a bunch of thugs. But that being said, like you see like the way that some like these kids are like these very traumatized socially, sort of like like socially dysfunctional families sort of like produce these kids who just like just running around the streets and like in Redfern the block. I had a story back in the Redfern block is for Sabina's case, she's in Melbourne, but we have this area around Redfern called the Block, which is probably one of the biggest Aboriginal communities in Australia, and like urban ones. And in the 80s and 90s, around where like Newtown is and Glebe and stuff, the local council mandated that you put iron bars over your windows because kids would come around and throw rocks through them and try and break in. And
straight up like South Africa.
Yeah. There used to be riots in the block and everything. The main issue here being that when it all happened, there was this. It's what typically a lot of Aboriginal dense communities. There would be a couple of people who went to a place and it was cheap, or there was government funding or whatever, and then maybe two people were given an apartment in a 2-bedroom apartment, and then suddenly because of this mob sort of like mob helps mob mentality, my dad would describe something back in the 80s how like a 2-bedroom apartment will suddenly have like a family of 10 inside it, because people out living in the country in the these outback communities would hear that their cousin had gotten a 2-bedroom apartment in Redfern, middle of the city, in a prime location, and they're like, oh fuck, I want this. So they would like pressure their family member to bring them in, and suddenly a 2-bedroom apartment would become unlivable, and it would have people running around everywhere, people shouting noise, multiple generations in this place. And yeah, it sounds like a typical sort of multi-generational household, but there'd be beer and drugs involved, there'd be smoking around the kids, there'd be maybe giving the kids a taste of alcohol. I mean, you get this in like bogan communities and like derelict white communities too. Especially in certain parts of Sydney, Wollongong, Newcastle, what have you. But the same issue kind of presides. Like the kids are exposed to all this awful stuff. Very troubled households. And look, it's like there's been heaps of gentrification in the block since, but you'll still get this stuff where it'll be like. Back about when I was in high school, there was a kid I knew who was doing karate lessons, and he was over in a little suburb called Darlington, and he was walking through Redfern Station. He was going the back streets. 12-year-old, he was like 16 at the time, but a 12-year-old kid and a 7-year-old jumped him, and they want to try and like just assault him because they thought it was fun. It means a black belt in karate, right? So he breaks all their arms and then makes the other kid runs away scared. But he hadn't had that defense. Like, he'd actually warned them, but they just kept on wanting to fight, so he just breaks one of their arms, right? And he's a 16-year-old kid, one's 12, right? And the other one's 7, so obviously he had, like, the weight and height difference. But even then the kids will have a fight. And it's like, I don't know, like there is typically, they call that punch-ons. So like they're typically in like, news or anywhere in Australia, you get this expression called punch-ons where it's just like social to just punch each other for some reason.
I've experienced that. I've gone to that before. I can show you guys a spot. I literally looked. Where's it?
She's representing on the camera. Oh, there's a something she. Around, just this. Apparently, she had a stab wound on her stomach, which is pretty wild. Yeah, ouch. Yeah, ouch. Yeah, well, there we go. There we go.
Oh shit!
Yeah, that's a bit much. Yeah. I mean, but what I'm going to say here too is like it's like punch-ons is just this thing where it'll be like, oh yeah, just punch-ons, bro. It's just like, just do it. It's like the equivalent of just, it's just about as casual in some of these communities, it's like doing a shoey. It's like
That because maybe those communities don't have, I guess, the resources that other communities might have. This might be a way of them like trying to have the status things. So let's say in like more affluent community, it could be like, I'm gonna buy a Bentley. Oh, my neighbor bought a Bentley. I'm gonna get a McLaren, But because they don't have access to that wealth or that kind of insulation, maybe their violence is the way of trying to preserve status.
I think it's definitely to show them up, like more machismo kind of thing.
yeah, and you can see why there's all these top Aboriginal boxers, right? Like Anthony Mundine and stuff.
Oh yeah, our mates, mate.
Yeah,
Not
well,
mates.
we don't want the Mundines. But anyway, but they're like, I won't mention his name either. But basically, yeah, with Mundine, like a lot of these boxers, rugby players, whatever have you, they do so well in sport. I mean, I've heard like described as, obviously you get like a lot of ethnic minority communities that have good sports people in those areas because that's like a way of getting a lot of money. It's like getting sponsorship and stuff, and it's a way of like living in poverty and stuff. But one thing I've heard with the original boxers is like, I just wanted to have it described for me once. Like this is by a person who knew about this stuff and did social work with Aboriginals, but he said that like, with the boxing, it's because they've got very dense bones and they're very lean typically. So when they're not on white man's diet, they're very typically lean and have very dense bones. And so they can like take a beating and they can also deliver a beating whilst also being very agile.
Oh.
And so that's why they make great boxers.
Oh.
But, there's also kind of also feeds in, there's this, it kind of defeats this myth about like, because there's a lot of these early diaries of the explorer Ludwig Leichhardt who documented like some pretty graphic violence between warring tribes in Aboriginal communities, and like kind of like these sparring matches they'd have with like spears and clubs against one another in quite violent ways, with very kind of little kind of medical technologies to try and like cure some wounds. They would just like use cauterize with fire and
No, before 1788.
yeah, before 1788 there wasn't even herbology from what I understand. They used to
bush tucker, I guess.
No, but like they didn't use herbology. They were healing plants. But a lot of what Ludwig Leichhardt documented was that they would do things like they would suck with their mouth, like rheumatism. They would make an incision with like a piece of a flint, and then they would suck like arthritis or rheumatism out of a joint, like suck it, like mouth on wound stuff. You can probably see how like plagues spread so quickly, like pox, because they tried sucking the pox out of a person and it just spread.
Yeah.
Right. So, it sounds crazy. It's like that's literally how it happened.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently, with the AIDS virus, when it started, people were eating chimpanzees and like actual like
Bushmeat,
bushmeat in some of these countries, and cross the species barrier on these diseases that shouldn't have spread.
What would compel you to consume a chimpanzee? Is what I'd like to.
I thought it was because of like, so-called bush medicine and a whole religious aspect, almost like their own version of, you know how like Chinese medicine, they believe erroneously things like, which is a literal one, that eating tiger penis makes you more sexually active or something like that.
Muslims believe stuff like that too. They think drinking camel piss gives you like health.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Yeah, kind of bushwhack stuff. Yeah.
But if a bushwhacked, if I can say something different now,
yeah, like I was saying about before, though. Onto the gender war thing as well. Continuing with the gender war thing with the 62 million stat. Now, I don't know if Sabina or Stern has seen that article, but CNN made a report, and this I think is relevant on how feminists look at the evidence as well. And I don't even know if they made the headline for this. Ironically, people sensationalize the already sensationalized headline. But essentially, it was a report about some CNN journalists went to check out a porn website called Motherless, which is like a broader, like a same thing as Pornhub, just not as big. Went in something called the sleep category. So like Sabina sort of spoke about before, the whole idea of like having sex with someone who's asleep, but a lot of that is also simulated. Then looking at, admittedly, as you are going to get on any sort of pornography thing, Pornhub got stung for it as well, which is why they check out every video now. There's going to be some non-consensual stuff in there, including actual people who are asleep, getting raped, therefore. And then they saw either on one of those videos or a handful of those videos, a Telegram link that was given out where there was exactly 1,000 men around the world being taught how to rape women properly, usually they're SOs, and get away with it, like ways.
Yeah, so what's that SO mean?
Of significant other. So wife, spouse, whatever. Now, what they saw it as was, oh my God, 62 million men are on a rape academy. That's how they put it out.
62 million men, but why was 62? Because 62 million.
No, 62 million was the views.
On the actual website.
Yes.
We have to realize women can be like minorities sometimes. They don't really understand actual like statistics or like empirical data. It's like the concept is solipsism. So once they want to track mind about something, they just think everyone is going to see it like that. And I saw so many essays coming out because I don't actually block the feminists. I actually like to engage with them. Some of them I'm subscribed to on something.
You're brave.
I need to see.
I've seen some of the vitriol that you guys get into each other.
I haven't been doing anything honestly, but clearly at the top.
I saw some old woman like Kalula Biley or something like that, and then or something.
Yeah, she was telling me, she's like, you shouldn't post stuff like this. It's gonna lead you to get assaulted more. And I was like,
what?
It's just, we'll get into older women later. I'm gonna go first, but before I did that, I wanted to ask you guys something so you can discuss while I'm out there and I can hear you. But what have your experiences with women been like pre-2015, 14 with the whole YouTube movement versus post?
sure.
Oh, geez. I mean, Gish can answer that better than me because I kind of came more into my own. I'm a bit of a late bloomer, so I kind of came into it during that kind of period, but I do remember the time before it where, honestly, in all honesty, I felt things were a little bit simpler. I think things were...
It was pre-2016 as well, actually.
Pre-2016, yeah. But like online Tumblr feminism and stuff like that, I felt like, I remember when I used to be in a group with Doctor Who and nerd fans, and I was a bit more of a troublemaker or a bit of a mischief maker, a bit of a clown, and then they were some like teachers' pets, right? But then they're also very politically correct. But for the most part, we got on and we talked about, the nerd stuff and our Doctor Who's and our, our Harry Potters and Star Warses and whatever else. But as soon as like things started, taking a bit of a turn and, they wanted all this extra diversity when it didn't really contribute to the narrative and all sort of stuff and questioned it, they would get really offended. There was...
like the mess.
Yeah. But I remember like, that was very weird at my school. This is high school, right? You could just stand at bitchy high school and, people were shoving themselves. But I remember these experiences I had where I had a bit of a problem where I was... We want what I didn't have, right? So I'd usually be a girl who, ended up usually dating someone else, and that was a push of doing for people who were single, right? But it was silly. I like to for people who were wanted goods, so to speak. It sounds silly, but that's should be for human being some goods, but you know what I mean.
It's just being a kid back then.
Yeah, being a kid back then. But I just remember like one girl, I won't mention her name, but a very common redhead we both know from my grade, and
Yes.
she was before she was one of like these nerds group.
I see you mean like goods now.
fellow. Well, but fellow. She was a fellow nerd, fellow sort of internet browser. We liked a lot of common jokes and a lot of like. We both got in comics. She gifted me Mouse for my birthday, but by Art Spiegelman, so she,
Good book.
good book, yeah. But then I'd had a bit of a crush on her at one point before she started going out with a guy.
Welsh right? Double L.
Yeah,
Double L.
she obviously understood that, but then I think I privately said to her friend, which was silly, but it was like 16. I said to her, like, look, I do like her, but I kind of wish she wasn't with her boyfriend at the time, which was a silly thing to say, but then, I think can you probably keep that private, and then obviously if a friend tells her, and then she messages me saying, I'm not even remotely attracted to you, and, I can't believe you're so immature to think that I should break up with my boyfriend, and I'm, right, okay, but, she could have just said, like, I don't know if she really would have been offended if I said something like that, so I'm just saying...
Both took it badly, obviously.
But, but obviously took it badly, but, not remotely attracted to you, and it's like, I was, like, kind of fooling myself, and, like, I know that, like, I've had comments of people, I'm like I've got people say I'm a good-looking bloke, I'm not up myself, but I've had, a lot of people comment on that kind of thing, and, I'm proud of trying to maintain my appearance, so, but there's part of me that's like, when I was a teenager trying to form myself, it took me a little while, like, and that kind of really hurt me for back when I was like 16.
Oh, everyone, it hurt for everyone
Yeah.
that age.
And it would feel like a dagger to the guts. And when they're so rightly attracted to you, it's like, I knew that I had good aesthetics, I felt like I had a good face, and, I felt like I wasn't an ugly person, but I struggled with socialization stuff, and, back when I didn't know it was high-functioning Asperger's, but it was, I had diagnosed with OCD and stuff like that, and I thought it was just different, and I thought something I did was, or who I was, was an awful thing, and, I had to do all this stuff to try and, like, appease myself to women because of, some of these feminist, ultra-feminist types of groups, and obviously I'm probably over-dramatizing it a little bit, but it hurt. It hurt a lot, and she was also a particularly vicious person. She's, from, I don't want to spread rumors, she ended up getting together with this kind of guy who, the kind of meme of, like, a vacuous, consumer sort of, like, hipster guy who only thinks about Star Wars and Nintendo Switch and gets a vasectomy sort of look.
Yeah, the meme I sent last time.
She's going out with one of these guys, and then she dumps him. They seem to go from, like, more and more feminine, and then you see where this is going. Then she ditched him, and then got with a butch.
Yes.
And she gained a shit ton of weight after getting with a butch lesbian.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, and then bought a greyhound, and they were walking a greyhound around the markets, and I'm thinking, there we go. And it's just funny because it's like, there was another story I had where, like, I was kind of, it sounds awful, sort of silly, but I was getting bullied I was on a musical together with some people, and, we had, obviously doing a school musical, you'll have, a couple of gay guys, and I'm very close with some, gay friends, but, like, this particular guy, I didn't know he was gay at the time, but he was just very, very fucking rude, and he just was constantly going on about my singing and what notes, pitches I would hit and stuff. And yeah, like, getting some feedback when someone's singing if they're off key is important, but he would just tell me to shut up and stop singing when I was doing the musical. And I'm like, what the fuck? Stop it. This is really fucking rude. And then the next thing I see is that he brings his boyfriend from another school when we were doing practice one day, when it's school holidays, holiday practice, right? He starts making out with him in front of everyone and stuff. And then I told my dad at the time, when I was doing this and I was having a bit of stress with this guy. My dad goes, oh, here he is thinking he's a bully, but he just turns out to be a bitchy queen. And it's like, I really credit my dad, my late father, for that one. That was really nice of him. It just kind of, like, puts a lot of stuff in perspective sometimes, like, not to point the stereotypes, but, like, before I knew the guy was gay, right, I felt like this guy was just a nasty piece of shit, and he was in this extended French social circle group that I just had, all these teacher pet types in the nerd group that I was in. It just turns out, he was just bitchy weirdo, I don't know, obviously, like, bullying can happen from anyone, anywhere, but, you're a lady who was getting bullied by two lesbians, but, of a lesbian couple on, on like a board, and she was like working for the board, and these which lesbian couple, both of them were on the board, and they were bullying her.
Mm.
So two of these lesbians, were bullying her. It's like it's a bit crazy, but it was, this stuff bullying can happen from anywhere, right? But there was something reassuring to sort of put it in perspective that this guy was just his own issues and it's weird. And like even with this girl in particular turning out to be like a lesbian or whatever at the end, obviously like you could see like there was probably some level of hate or like weirdness going on with her anyway.
Mm.
So she didn't seem that attracted to like, more, I don't know, like you could say like conventional men. She would go, they would get more and more feminine as time went on. Not to criticize, feminine guys constantly, but it's just that whole stereotype of, hey, my wife's boyfriend, my bull, just bought me a Nintendo Switch because I got a vasectomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
Apparently that's more of a meme. I don't know if I think even the original was non-genuine, but it was still fucking funny. It's true. But for me though, like with from what Sabina asked, for me, I think the SJW stuff started in 2013. I know people disagree with me, but I know this because with that, the wiry French guy we know.
yeah, we knew a French guy in our grade.
Sorry.
Yeah, he was with me in back in year 12 for the study group stuff. Remember they had like a gap in the school stuff. In year 12, had a gap for studying, and I remember we were in there, and obviously most of the time we procrastinated in there, the well academic students, and he was showing me, haha, look at this SJW owned stuff, and he was showing me all this of the stuff, and that was 2013, so it was definitely back then. For me, I don't think it impacted me much at all. Like, I wasn't really looking for girls in high school, not because I didn't want to. I was always a bit of a horny bastard even back then. But no, because I was just like that kind of ugly loser kid, to be honest. So I was never on anyone's radar in particular, although I did ask out my crush from my tutor group for formal. She surprisingly gave me a chance to ask her for that, but obviously I was shot down like anything, like I thought I would, but nothing as bad as what you went through, Stern. It was just more like, oh, sorry, I'm not interested. But I think most of that sort of stuff came out when, I suppose I'm a bit of a late bloomer like you as well, Stern. In uni, I started doing a lot better. Now, I had a gap year in 2015, so this is in 2016, but that's when Me Too came out. And I thought Me Too was surprising because before...
2017 or 18 when that happened, actually.
Are you sure?
Yeah. I remember when I used to use Twitter, it was like, when I was 19 or 21, it was probably that time, right? But it was when Alyssa Milano had exposed stuff on Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, was that 2017?
Yeah.
I think that's when before that happened, because I do recall seeing certain stuff before that, but it wasn't as big as we see now. But I do recall Alyssa Milano was learning about Harvey Weinstein. At the beginning of the Me Too movement, I was actually quite supportive, which seems antithetical to my personal beliefs. But if we have like these men in positions of power doing like freaky sex stuff, like that should be exposed. I think where they started losing me is when they extrapolated men in positions of power to the everyday man and, oh, well, who's who? How are we going to know who to be safe around? Where it's like, really?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Most men are not insulated enough by power while to even make that like risk. Like
Even just going down and cold approaching a woman on the street, I try to think about it from a man's perspective. I try to be as kind and amicable to any guy that approaches me, even if I'm not interested, because I understand the confidence it takes to just cold approach someone.
And that's why it's hard for me to believe that.
It's just a question on that one. Just looking to differentiate. You can differentiate between what you might call a cold approach when someone's like kind of chatting you up, right, and just being nice and friendly, and maybe they're just struggling a bit with the socialization. Because when I talk to girls and I know how to chat them up, right, I can be a very warm guy, or not dates that way, but like, act that way because I'm just a warm, charismatic guy. But, there's some guys who struggle with that sort of chatting up, so to speak, and it can become really awkward, right? And then some girls just sense the fear, right, and they probably find it weird. you differentiate between that and like I don't know, like an extreme example, like I'll start coming up to you on the central station and you'll coming up and say, oh, wow,
Yeah, of course.
It's like it's circumstantial, like it's different contexts. He's not a big league player anyway. But yeah, I'm also made just like if someone approaches me and they're like, hey, I think you're pretty, or even if they're like awkward sometimes, I'll jump in and I'll say, hold on, I'll be like, here, you can have my number. Even if I don't plan on contacting them, because at the very least that kind of builds confidence. I have a big philosophy about confidence. It's not really something you can fake. I know people say like just fake it until you make it, but I think true confidence comes from being a competent person. And even though I'm not interested, I feel by giving my number or being receptive to their approach, the next time that they do approach a woman, they'll have more confidence, and maybe that woman will actually be interested in that.
Yeah. I've noticed that a bit. I mean, even when it's funny, like, there's been a certain threshold I've noticed with girls, and you can comment on this you want, Sabina, but I've noticed with a certain threshold, like, depending on how my mood is and how, like, I'm comporting myself at the time. So I've noticed, like, when I've been at my best and most alert, and I'm most charismatic, like, even if I'm a bit odd or, if I, like, joke around a bit, like, oh, sorry if that was a bit much, or, I'll be like, oh, can I get WhatsApp? And then it'll be like, well, maybe not WhatsApp, I can get Instagram. And they're like, oh, you can have my Instagram, it's all very chilled out, and, we end up becoming friendly. Chatting on Instagram for a bit, and sometimes you just end up being friends or just following each other, right? But then there's been times where, I've been like, I don't know, like I've had my medication interact once when I was first taking some new medication, trialing it, and I drank. It didn't interact very well, and then it's fine now. But like when I was first starting, it didn't interact very well, and I was just a little out of it. And I didn't do anything silly. I just looked very dead. I was at my favorite meetup event, a language meetup event, Aloha, where I was like to go to, and the girlfriend through that one, yeah. But I was just out of it. Like, I was just staring off into space, right? And I just, like, was chatting to one girl, and I think she was kind of being nice, but also, like, there was part of me that felt weird about it, too. I speak fluent Italian, and I've been on exchange for a week, a month and a half, and, I was Italian girl, talking to her, and she goes, oh, ti voglio bene, which means I wish you well, or, I hope you're well, kind of thing. It's like, she genuinely said it out of, like, kind of concern, because I did look, like, a little out of it, but it's still at the same time, like, there's part of me that felt like if I felt so hyper aware, if that makes any sense. I felt hyper self-conscious because I knew I was a little bit buzzy, and so I felt if I was talking to a girl, I would look like I didn't think I was going to look like that druggie at the train station approaching a girl on the way home from work, but there was something in me that felt like I was in that state. Because, I've been in situations where I've, like, had to, like, wait forever to get a medication refill, right? And then I've had some withdrawals. And I'm kind of like, I wouldn't be literally shaking, but I'd have, like, a bad headache and stuff, and I would go into the chemist. And they get all kinds of weird people, right, asking for prescriptions and that sort of stuff. But because I was, like, a little bit impatient, I was just like, can I please get it? And, 5 to 10 minutes, please. I'm just, I'm having a bit of a hard time. There was part of me that was just like, my head was pounding, and I'm like, I don't want to look like I'm a dangerous person or something like that, but I just need my fucking medication, and the way that they treat me.
How it interacts with you, the alcohol.
No, but even like in other cases where, like, even I've been off for medication and I need to get it for a bit because I haven't had to be able to, get a repeat prescription, right, and it's a controlled drug. I'll have like a withdrawal sort of thing, and I'll just be like, my head will be pounding, and I'll be like a little bit less patient than normal, that kind of thing. And like, I have to be polite and stuff, but there's also part of me that's like very impatient with, like, how much chemists and various doctors and receptionists are trying to make you wait for things. And it just kind of like I can visibly look very annoyed in my face when that's happening, and they can sense that, and so they kind of like treat you with like extra precaution in some ways. And it fucking sucks to be in that situation because you just want to fucking get back in the dose and be in the normal headspace again. But when they're treating you like that, especially if it's like some little old woman behind the chemist dispensing the drugs, you can see like you get this fear in her eyes, and I'm like, I don't want to fucking make you scared. I just want my fucking medication.
All right, sweetheart, we'll get that in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I fucking went to the dentist one time when I think I was having that kind of feeling, and the dentist knew me, and I was fine and stuff. But like, they had this like this old 6-year-old woman, short woman who like just had a bit of a fluttery heart, right? And she, I don't know what it was, but I just wanted to sit and wait for the appointment and just be on my phone, right? And the receptionist was giving me a hard time about sitting in the waiting chair, waiting for the appointment. You half an hour, come back then. And it's like, well, I just want to sit and wait on my phone for a bit. And just like, okay, well, just she's in the appointment right now. It's like, okay, fucking calm down.
Sometimes I feel like a man because I'm black. Like, mind you, I'm a very harmless person. I'm not one of them bitches that's large and in charge. I'm a very small, dainty girl. So when I'm walking down the street and I notice like people have like, maybe not an aversion. Aversion is too like dramatic, but like sometimes they'll see me like walking around the corner or like they'll jump back a little bit. And I've had experiences where like, funnily enough, this happened at a chemist as well. I was going to grab a plan B at the time. And this lady, it started off as such a normal interaction. She was like, I love your dress. I was like, thank you so much. It was just like my emotional back. And she's like, is it real? I was like, yeah. And she's like, did you steal it? I was like, just being very like abrasive towards me. And I was like, why the fuck would I steal it? You know about? And she's just like, you don't understand. I was like, babe. So I feel like that's why I sympathize with men a lot, because I've been put in positions where people are just like afraid of me. I'm not going to do anything. But sometimes I'm not going to lie. I don't recommend men do this at all. Yeah. But like sometimes if I see someone like anticipating like anger or like aggression towards me, like I will like bait them a little bit. Like.
Yeah, you can get away with that because you're
you can't.
You're a pretty young girl. You're pretty skinny young girl. You don't look like you do a lot of damage to someone, but so that's kind of funny, right?
Take advice by caution, guys.
Well,
if you look at me, I'm quite a big, like, muscly dude. And,
they don't know.
I would probably scare a lot of people if I was that kind of person and do some like sudden movement to try and scare someone. Like I'd look like some weird.
Oh no, I definitely wouldn't do that as a dude. No, but with what Sabina said last time, though, no, that's when I think Me Too went bad, and when I'd say the gender relations went to shit, because before it was like, obviously put a spotlight on these powerful people trying to get away with all the sexual assault. That's a good thing. But when they then that's when all that sort of enough men and all that sort of stuff happens, and arguably all the same sort of bullshit of I'd rather choose the bear over the man, that all comes from that.
Literally,
Yes.
and I know what they're trying to say, but I don't support that message. When they're like, oh, it's not all men, but it's always a man. Again, I've seen this other guy I subscribe to stuff like this Moroccan microphone. He made a point where it's like, okay, it's not all black people, but it's always black person. It's not all Arabs, but it's always American. And I feel like, how do I even explain it? I think feminists are reaching. You know how they have this thing where they're like, oh, 4B women are backing away? It's not the women that are backing away. Women still want to have relationships with men. I think men are just tired of like, I'm fed up. If I'm going to be seen as like a predator or like some violent criminal that's just like waiting to harm someone, I might as well disengage.
That's exactly why I don't date in Newtown. I go to places like Aloha, like I said again, because genuinely, I think, no, seriously, like women, like Aussie women are okay, I guess. Obviously, I'm talking generally here, so everyone's different, but that's why I have my Santa, like, I like, well, yeah, there are Asian girls. They haven't been the only girls I've ever dated. I've dated white women as well and all that, and I've gone on good, pleasant dates with them. Most of the time, more technically situationships. Everyone calls everything a goddamn relationship these days, but more on the very short-term relationship situation stuff. But I have dated some white girls as well. But I think like at least the more forward-thinking Asian girls have got the perfect mix. They're not like entirely submissive to you, which obviously even as a guy that's technically advantageous, but it feels a bit weird having someone that wants to be like a servant to you, but at the same time they're not sort of overly and annoyingly domineering. Like, those men, they may as well be like the guys going, oh, my wife's boyfriend got me the Xbox or whatever with the vasectomy. Yeah, it's something like that. The ones that date people, like I've discussed this stuff with people online, the sort of typical millennial sort of guy that looks like a gay lumberjack or whatever, who's now balding or whatever, going, oh yeah, you know, don't you realize men really are the problem? We're so bad with this and that. It's almost like sort of self-derision. And I'm like going, what the fuck, man? Like, who the hell do you date? And they always say something like, and I do believe them, oh no, I've got a lovely supportive wife and all. And that wife is probably feeding him this bullshit, going like, you guys really are this and that. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, darling, I'm so sorry.
Chungus. There's this famous meme I sent. There's like a consent to you later, Sabina. It's like I put it in the show notes again. It was this thing called Chungus that people have been talking about. I think it was like some parody. It came off from some web comic set with 4chan and there's the rest of the internet. There's this typical line of one of these women who are like short and weird and right web comics and has a shirt saying a baggy shirt saying I love cats.
Yes.
And then
That is not a bad bitch.
There's a cat one of the comic panel saying child replacement.
Yes.
It's a dog.
Yeah, fur.
Your fur baby, and then there's a dog, and then there's a guy who's just like vacuously staring off into space and Star Wars on his t-shirt. And he's got these thick frame rimmed glasses, and it's just a gay balding lumberjack, with no personality except for like the latest consumer thing that came out. That
not even that, but self-hating. That's the thing I mean. At least the forward-thinking Asian girls, they come over here, and they have obviously enough of their own issues with their men. They're like Sabina probably has issues with the men in Sudan or.
I actually like black men a lot. It's really just an aesthetic preference.
Oh,
When
no,
I
I
was
just mean
young
the
as well,
ones
I saw
in-
beautiful men. I was like, ooh, my eyes will get me excited.
But yeah, you know what I mean, though, in these countries where the men feel outright entitled to women. Like the forward-thinking women from like Asian women, they come over here, they're like, a lot of our men, they kind of expect us to stay, what we call in the West, chained to the stove. They want us to clean after them. They want us to do all the emotional labor. And then when they see a guy who's obviously a bit more wanting to help out, a bit more romantic, they love that. But they're also not pushy, like going, oh, you're an enemy to me. Like they never say this bullshit like enough men. They don't give any of that crap, and they actually show that they love you. There's none of this sort of conditional stuff, or like my parents are from that sort of generation, again, kind of boomers, Gen X, where they're like, okay, I understand they care a lot about the equality and stuff, but I've debated them before, and I said this on my Substack before, when everything has to be 50-50 to the point it may as well be a spreadsheet. Like going, oh yeah, I don't know, I clean half of the half of this side of the dish, so you clean. That's going over the top. Like I wrote about before, I don't believe in gender roles, but when a lot of these, especially Gen Z people, are getting into relationships now, they don't know what the fuck to do, and they have these, which it must be something social or genetic, whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter. They have these expectations of what men or women should be, but because they don't have gender roles, they sort of just go on that read my mind expectation on both genders. So the usual stereotype is do the dishes, or why haven't you done the bins yet? It's a man's job, or.
I think I can be like that sometimes, but I walk my walk of life, you know what I mean? I understand you guys that like the lady boomers. I think that's actually very common among intelligent men. Take the compliment, nice.
Thanks.
But I was an early boomer. My kids came in when I was like 13. I was off a rocket. And I've always been very enthralled by men and trying to purposely titillate them. So, like, I've had play boyfriends. I don't consider them serious boyfriends because it was just like high school and stuff like that. But in terms of, like, my outer relationships, like my engagement that dissolved and then my boyfriend, I've actually been proposed to 5 times. That's insane. But, anyway, that's just some context. I feel like Gen Z, particularly Gen Z women, they have the issues that they're trying to invert the gender roles.
Because what's happening is, not to drag millennials, but I'm going to drag them. Millennial women are kind of like telling these Gen Z women, well, men, they don't want someone chained to the stove, which is true. Men, they value, excitement, autonomy. I wouldn't say toxic behavior, but just tension. Tension sustains attraction, you know what I mean?
Yes.
But with the gender roles, I'm very different in terms of like the gender roles I expect. I've never picked up a bill in my life. I'm very like domestic orientated, But I think that these women, they're being told by all women, and even women from like, I wouldn't say really boomers, because the boomers were pretty traditional as well, but I would say like, maybe more Gen X, and they're being told men don't want this. They want a woman that's gonna like be an equal partner. They want a woman that's gonna be this. And the problem is when women hear equal partner, they hear act like men. And I've seen a lot of even with my friends, sometimes I have to call them out. Not in a bad way, because I want the best for my friends. So I'm trying to help them out. Where I'm like, you need to be more receptive. You need to just relax a little bit. Yes, you can have your preferences, but you should say your preference. You should say the standard that you have, and then you let that person follow through. You shouldn't be trying to mother them and trying to like force them into a specific thing. And I think sometimes what women will do is they'll have a specific attraction to a man, or say like he has a trait like his intelligence, and they'll be attracted to that when they're not exclusive. And then once they become exclusive, they kind of panic a little bit and they're like, oh my god, these things that I liked previously, they're now a source of anxiety. And I think that a lot of the tension that happens is managing. They're trying to manage that man. They're trying to turn him into something that he's. This obviously from outside perspective. When I look at white race dynamics, this is not coming from intersexual competition. Obviously, I date white men, but the white men I date are not the ones that I dated like 1 year or whatever, you know. But I just feel like because white men are so giving to their women, that sometimes white women, they see that as a point of weakness. Or, and even that's an overreach, but like, I don't think it's like a conscious thing, but I think it's like, they feel like, okay, well, our men are not dominant. Because, again, to revert to the Me Too stuff, they will pull that out. They'll say it's not all women, but it's always a man. But when you bring up something like the Pakistani and Indian, these various ethnicities, the grooming gangs, and the entire like rape stuff in the UK, for example, they'll turn around and they'll be like, well, that's racist. You shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Which one is it? Is it all men, or is there particularly white men that you have grievances against? Because I feel like that's what it is. I think that they're just angry that their father maybe wasn't dominant enough, or their brothers might be preclusives, and they want to blame all white men for that.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
I'm just gonna finish my cigarette.
Yeah, I mean, also it's a completely kind of outdated sort of dynamic. So a lot of these millennial women, I've got cousins who are in this sort of category, right? And you grew up with these 80s films that I've seen too, where like back in the 80s there was a lot of, you know, rife misogyny, and there was the Wasp, and there was this balding, you know, fat capitalist, fat cat, you know, there was, my mum worked in some of these workplaces where like, you know, some old fat man would like, you know, look at her and say, girly, girly, come here, girly, come on, girly, girly. You know, she was like a nursing intern.
You said this was like the 80s or 90s?
80s and 90s, you know, there was like some, you know, there was some like shitty fat, you know.
Left over from the 60s.
Yeah, these old, the leftover 60s, 70s sort of bosses, right? Who probably had folds of fat instead of penises, but that was a joke. But it's like it's just it's at this point now where a lot of these millennials will watch these kinds of films with the attitudes that pushing up back against that era, right? And then we'll think, you know, those girl power action films that came out and stuff, Kill Bill and all that. But then you'll see, you know, and you'll see like Meryl Streep films and Winona Ryder films. But the problem is that it's that era that it was relevant to, and then these millennials, they become a brand in themselves, and then they think that like when like men have watched these films too and very much subdued and learnt the critique and become better people because of that, they still treat the men the same way because they want to feel like these characters. They will just like whip a guy who's like, you know, not even that bad for just making an off-color joke. Because I watched, you know, you watch a George Carlin skit, and George Carlin was a left-winger, but George Carlin would make all kinds of stupid jokes about, you know, women, black people, Jews, you know, this, that, and the other. He was an Irishman, you know, but he would always critique power, and he would critique white male power as well. But like, it was just like, there was this, you know, he once made a funny joke. He's like, you know, I fid the feminists, but it'd be kind of funny if I walked into like, you know, one of these feminist associations and just shouted out, who wants to give me a blowjob? You know, it's like, you know, he made this joke in the 90s, and it's still great. The way he executed it was so fucking funny. And a lot of women in the audience are still laughing too, but it's just the way he delivered it. But I just think like, you know, if you make an off-color joke along those lines, and he's like one of the comedic greats, right?
Mm.
You know, there's so many of these millennial women who watch these films from the 80s who want to feel like Winona Ryder or Beryl Streep, and will start like, you know, acting heaps bitchy towards you and saying like you're gonna condone violence against women or something.
So it's like one of those virtue signaling things, that when they attack a film from 20, 30 plus years ago and they think they're so amazing for pointing out that, yeah, things haven't always dated well, as if like...
Yeah, no, but they will always, like, you know, always the references I always would get, like, for making, like, one off-color joke or silly joke, even, like, as a teenager, right? Which is, you know, did you know back in before the 60s or whatever, 40s or whatever, Aboriginals were considered fauna and flora?
Oh, no.
And it's like that one, you know. Yeah, okay, like, relatively recent period within the last 100 years or so. Yes, Aboriginal people were classified by traditional English ways of looking at a civilization, and since they didn't have agriculture or writing, therefore they weren't considered civilized, therefore they weren't considered citizens, therefore they were considered fauna and flora. But that was the way that, you know, the British colonial system reviewed what they considered a civilization, right? And yeah, it was like very restrictive and discriminatory. But once you look at it in context, you know, like they would try and look at it the same way that you might look at, you know, like, you know, like these nomadic tribes and stuff like that. They guess they'd be considered as citizens, or like, you know, like they didn't have a form of civilization. Too cool. Like back in Tasmania, the Tasmanian Aboriginals, there was these diaries of Captain Cook that would like describe how like the Tasmanian Aboriginals have been isolated from the mainland. They're like most isolated people in all of the world, right? They would travel in packs and they would have chieftains and multiple wives and stuff. Yeah, no. Well, that's funny, yeah. But like they would travel in like groups, right? And then they would have apparently no concept of I or you. It was just we, he, she, they, and then someone's name. Oh. And it was a case of like, you know, there'd be a chieftain and everything, and they refer to the chieftain, right? There'd be a power dynamic, but then the chieftain might father kids to multiple women, and then and also like the woman might like then go around with multiple men. And,
oh yeah.
And it's a case of like people were just effing each other, and then, you know, kids were all just kind of like, it was a relatively diverse gene pool with all the cross effing, and, you know, you probably have half siblings everywhere, but it was also a very small gene pool, right? And having they brought along a Pacific Islander ambassador from Tonga on the boat, Captain Cook's boat, I think. And
the translator. You mean?
Translator.
I thought he was Tahitian, actually.
Tahitian, yeah. But they the Tahitian guy, and they thought they could translate the Tasmanian Aboriginal language, but they couldn't understand it. At all, because it wouldn't even relate to anything that on the mainland continent, because they've been so isolated for so long.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating, right? It's yeah. I just thought, like,
Curious.
Yeah, it is curious. Well, you had a group that's isolated for so long, they basically don't even have a concept for, like, you know, describing what they are, right, as a person. They would think in the collective.
Yeah.
They would have a concept for their own name, right? But they wouldn't want to.
A bit like the Dreamtime sort of thing. Like, it's not their land; it's kind of the land.
Yeah. There was this concept of individuality. I think therefore I am wasn't. It's a relatively advanced concept, to be completely honest with you. There's a reason why they said Descartes' theorem, I think therefore I am, was so revelatory, because you're separating. You're creating proof of existence by the fact that you're aware of your own thinking.
Yes.
You know, the rationalism. And having these abstract ideas to be able to just, you know, come up with some idea about why we exist in everything on like an evidence-based scale. This concept that, you know, they might not even be, you know, it's all just collective consciousness, and that you subdue yourself to a collective consciousness.
Like a hive mind.
Hive mind almost, you know. It's quite fascinating. Yeah.
Reminds me, I remember reading an article once about I think a Namibian tribe they did understand the concept of it, but they didn't have a word for a particular color or something, and how that completely changed their way of thinking. Like, even that's a weird way to look at it. Like they weren't. I doubt they were literally colorblind, but it'd be almost like going, not calling your shirt red.
Is it like the concept of like blindness not being like? It's weird because like let's say you're a fully blind person, right? It's not that you're not seeing; it's that your eyes aren't actually process visual stimulus into like the graphic imaging in the brain.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like that. Because I try to wrap my head around blindness all the time, and I literally cannot. I don't understand.
I think on genders, it's almost like the stereotype. You know those memes when they're a guy is pointing at something, and then the girl's pointing at something on the other side, and they show it was something like the guy going, "Oh, red, green, blue." That's probably how we do think of colors, and then the girl's like going like fuchsia, saffron, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, exactly. It's a bit like that almost.
My mum's an artist as well. She's like a part-time artist. She would do art school, right? Full-time was public health and nursing and stuff. But she, there was, I once remember buying a colour pencil palette, and I got to do my own art, right? And I posted some of my charcoals and also posting notes. But I didn't even know things like crimson red and yellow ochre and the caramel were like considered colours in these art pencil things.
Exactly.
I mean, then I start calling it that, and then my colour palette starts thinking about these colours. But obviously having a name for something you didn't realise there was a name for. But there's also a part of me that just looks at these things and I'm like, I don't know. It's hard to say these things. I mean, back to the original concept thing I was talking about, the reason I went on this tangent was because, you'll get a lot of people like having a go at the old way of like, making a joke about like, I don't know, anything Aboriginal, this or that, and then like, them trying to, this type of, politically correct type that I kind of grew up around in the inner city of Sydney, said, don't you know that fauna and flora, and you're not automatically like trying to associate you with like this type of like dehumanizing colonialism from like hundreds of years ago. But this colonialism, I'm not trying to justify it, and it was racist, but I was just explaining the historical systems behind it. They're determined to be a civilization. If you've had a anthropologically isolated group for thousands of years and they don't even know what an IOU is, right?
I would say at that point, not even, like, obviously you could, I think this is one of those cases like two things can be true at once. Like, obviously, the effects of colonialism on a native population is going to show up badly, but where I would say is you have to remember the mindset of the colonialists. They weren't trying to be malicious. They weren't. I'm sure, yes, there were some colonialists that were just malicious and they just wanted to like abuse others, right? But I think in general, the idea of paternalism, the idea of trying to figure out whether it's something is civilized or not, or a group is civilized or not, at that point, and I say this with caution because I'm not saying this to dehumanize, but if you've been isolated for that long, you don't even have the concept of I, you, them, you only have the concept of like we, at that point, you effectively are behaving as if you are like fauna and flora, because obviously I understand there's different perspectives of life, but I don't think it has to be either Aboriginals were just like these completely uncivilized beings and like the white man is just like this evil devil. I think there should be more nuance and there could be like a healthy medium to have these discussions,
Yeah, I mean, no, you're correct. It's also just worth acknowledging too that obviously these diaries we have of the Tasmanian Aboriginals are only real. Like they're very in depth, very detailed, but they're obviously like the only records we have because a lot of them died out, right, from disease and hunting. Whalers, and they had like what they called the squatters. Mm-hmm. The squatters were these people. They're a bit like the homesteaders. The ones who settled the west of the United States. They settled Tasmania and these rural areas, right? And a lot of the time it was, involving like taking home Aboriginal women and shooting Aboriginal women, that kind of thing.
Pioneers, basically.
Pioneers, yeah. And there was a lot of Aboriginals who were killed in these things. I mean, they talk about the massacre maps and everything. You look at the massacre maps, you know, these historical resources, and no more than about, no, I mean, I guess it's 200 people is a lot of people, but, you know, like max it ever picks up to what they call a massacre is like 200 people.
Yeah.
And then my grandfather lived through the Navorna massacre over in what's now Western Ukraine, but he was in Polish Galicia. You know, this is like thousands of people getting killed, and like, you know, like their own friends and family being forced to bury the people that just got shot. You know, so like dehumanizing the relatives, you know, making them mass grave their own friends. You know, my grandfather survived that because you know he witnessed it. Like he described it in that family journal we have that when the Nazis came in this particular village town of Nadvorna, which is called Nadvidna in Ukraine, when the Nadvorna massacre happened. In 42, I think it was 41 or something years earlier, before the camps went up, but the soldiers came in and just sort of just like ordered like a bunch of like the men sort of come out as well, like, you know, shredded, so the men come out typically and then would shoot like, you know, the less able-bodied, or then some kids would stay behind, the women would, and then the more able-bodied men would come out, and also the old people to be shot and then just put in a ditch, you know, by like the other men who didn't get shot.
Yeah.
And it was a form of dehumanizing them, and also just like cull the able-bodied population of them, right? You know, it's traditional, it's not in genocidal war where they kill the men first, the able-bodied men first, to completely kind of castrate the brute from fighting back. What my grandfather, he was a kid, a teenager at the time, so he kind of avoided it, right? But he would see, like, him and his family, like father and mother, you know, would see the other people from this Jewish ghetto, you know, being taken from Nadvorna to, you know, out into the forest and shot, you know, right? And so, you know, you knew that they died because a lot of them hadn't come back, and, you know, and picked to go bury them, right? Mm. So, you know, like, you know, there was obviously like big witness. He didn't personally witness, but people told him, you know, I'm the bury, right? And so, yeah, it was like, you look at a massacre of like 200 people versus like a couple thousand in like in an industrial type farming of genocide. That's, I mean, I don't want to try to compare the Holocaust to like, you know, the pioneers, but like, come on, like it.
I think it needs to be that way though, because they weren't exactly, the Aboriginal tribal groups weren't that big.
No.
So that's why they, yeah, I know you mean like the Appin massacre, that's technically only about 10 to 12. But obviously, you know, these are smaller tribal groups, so on proportion, that's probably a decent amount in terms of how much is wiped out.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, when I look at these things too, though, like I look at, you know, when I'm at the amount of people that get killed by disease and the way that pox would spread.
Yeah. From
what I read in like the Ludwig Leichhardt diaries, or like there was a channel on YouTube that read specific things from the extracts from this US dude called Mungo Manic, and he studies a lot of the diaries and reads them out and shit for some visuals. He like said that Leichhardt had said that I remember it was like a case of they always thought when one person caught pox, the first contact actually that happened was there was a guy called Benelong, and Captain Arthur Phillip actually saved this Aboriginal man called Benelong, his kids from pox. So they thought that, you know, everyone says historically that Arthur Phillip, first doctor of Sydney, kidnapped Benelong's kids and tried to like whitewash them. It's half true. You know, he took the kids and then he vaccinated them against pox when they caught pox, because Benelong had brought his kids to Arthur Phillip and his men to try and help them because they hadn't seen this disease before, right? And then he'd ended up vaccinating them, you know, inoculating them against pox, and then he thought, well, they were going to leave them for dead anyway. Like, they gave them these kids to us because they said, oh, it's your disease, kids are disease, you don't want them anymore. He tried raising them, and then when Benelong had heard that his kids had survived, he was obviously very upset that, you know, now that they were being raised as white people.
I thought Benelong was also, he was the first Aboriginal to go to Britain, wasn't he?
Right, yeah, that was. But like, I wanted to Benelong's kids or something. I might have been messing up the story, but just remember that there was the kids in this tribe from Benelong, where he was, were being raised by Albert Phillip and his men, and then And then they're like, well, could we have him back? And then eventually I thought, like, yeah, sure, why not? He ends up getting the kids back and giving them a hatchet, like, giving them a metal hatchet to like cut down trees better. So, giving them a hatchet, so it was a very nice story.
Yeah.
A Ryobi next. Get them a Ryobi.
That's right.
Yeah, the top. That's fun.
Yeah. So, we've had a bit of a funny episode actually. We've had a good range of topics, to be completely honest.
It's typical for this camera anyway.
Yeah, well, I call it the contemplation deck because we're going to get in this state where we're just stuck in it. Or,
Anyways, I'll be back to it. I'm gonna report that.
Sure. No, it sounds fun. I'm down.
Yeah, well, I've got that friend who's looking after people. So
I could take you around.
Then, so look, let's wrap things up. This is Sabina, Fish and Jish, and the Stone Golem, and it's been the Contemplation deck. We have been shitting on millennials, discussing Tasmanian Aboriginals, discussing colonialism, heartbreak, and gender war stuff. I feel like it's been a pretty good episode, but as we always say, your opinions are your own, even if you only hold them for 5 seconds. Thank you very much.